With the Chinese aggression in the South China Sea, compounded with the global spy balloon surveillance, alarm bells are ringing for global stakeholders, who are now looking to counter the growing Chinese threat. US, Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, along with Australia, are all preparing defenses against the Chinese aggression. For centuries, Japan and China have vied for hegemony in East Asia. At times, they have threatened each other's survival. For the US, China is a dangerous but distant challenge. For Japan, China is the existential danger next door. Years before the American leaders were proclaiming the return of great power rivalry, Japanese officials were warning that Beijing was up to no good. As China's capabilities became more formidable and its conduct in the Taiwan Strait more menacing, Tokyo's concerns grew more acute. For the first time since its devastating loss in World War II, the Japanese government has decided to put together an astonishing budget of more than $30 billion for its defense. Japan aims to double defense spending to 2% of gross domestic product, or GDP, over the next 5 years, in a departure from its post-war commitment to keeping spending at 1% of GDP. The increase would bring it into line with NATO countries and make it the world's third biggest spender on defense after the US and China. With its existing economical superiority in Asia, Japan is the West's new secret weapon against authoritarian Communist China. With its new 5-year defense plan, the Japanese government now plans to acquire new Hawk missiles from the US, which are capable of striking deep into Chinese territory. Now, this budget is going to double its military capability, and many in Tokyo have criticized the Japanese government. But the new military plan immediately sounded alarm bells for neighboring North Korea, Russia, and China. The Chinese Communist Party was not late in recognizing the growing threat, and it immediately quoted the Global Times report about the Japanese history as an expansionist empire, and that the new budget indicates growing danger for the continent, as if China itself has never taken such measures. But it is not only the Japanese government that has decided to gear up against the Chinese aggression. The US, Taiwan, Australia, along with the Philippines, all have decided to adopt a rather offensive stance against the Chinese Communist Party. After the uncovering of the Chinese global surveillance plan against the US and its allies, there is a looming threat that may redefine the course of history forever. The saga of the Chinese spy balloon floating over the United States dominated media attention, and its destruction by the US seemed a signal moment in the relationship between the two superpowers. It had already been a tense few months. Just before the balloon standoff, Washington took a major step to expand its military presence around the Chinese mainland. The US and the Philippines announced a deal allowing the American military to use 4 more bases in the Philippines. It was the latest move by Washington to build up its defense position in the Asia-Pacific, the likeliest site of any confrontation between the two, and it also encouraged the Japanese to play its role. The agreement with the Philippines followed last month's announcement by the US and Japan that they were adjusting the American troop presence on Okinawa, along with several other defense measures, as the country's top diplomats and military officials condemned Beijing's aggressiveness in the South China Sea. To compound everything, Washington agreed to provide Australia with nuclear-powered submarines as part of a new AUK-US defense alliance that includes Australia, the UK, and the US. The security partnership also includes cooperation in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Now, the question that needs to be addressed immediately is, are we seeing the formation of a new global bloc against the Chinese Communist Party? If so, what can be the potential response from Beijing? Meanwhile, Taiwan, which China claims as part of its historic territory, remains the biggest point of contention between the two countries. The situation is quite volatile. Over the last decade in particular, China has taken actions that have created volatility unaccustomed in the region since the Vietnam War. China has bullied and intimidated Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. At its land border with India, China's provocations in the last 2 years have resulted in great tensions. All this points to a significant escalation of tensions. Now that the US has secured bases in the Philippines, the Communist Party in China has to face an even stronger coalition. Rival countries have wrangled over territory in the South China Sea for centuries, but tension has steadily increased in recent years. China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Taiwan, Malaysia, and Brunei all have competing claims. China has backed its expansive claims with island building and naval patrols. The U.S. says it does not take sides in territorial disputes, but has sent military ships and planes near disputed islands, calling them freedom of navigation operations to ensure access to key shipping and air routes. Both sides have accused each other of militarizing the South China Sea. South Korea, Japan, China, and Australia have all boosted their naval power as they jostle for supremacy in the Pacific. As far as the Chinese objectives are concerned, gaining control over the South China Sea will provide it with many benefits, and it can also help intimidate the U.S. A group of small island countries in the South Pacific have become the latest flashpoint in the rivalry between the United States and China. Beijing has been eyeing Pacific Island countries as potential forward locations for its military operations. Noticing the Chinese adventures in the South Pacific, the Biden administration had to come up with an offensive of its own. Immediately, the U.S. called a conference with a dozen Pacific Island leaders in order to defer the Chinese threat. For years, Beijing has been building major infrastructure projects in the Pacific under its Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, including bridges, roads, wharfs, schools, and even vanity projects for elites. Chinese investment in this region presents the United States, Australia, and their partners with numerous problems, key among them corruption and the potential to undermine the government structures that Western donors seek to strengthen. One sector where Chinese influence is particularly concerning to Western countries is telecommunications. Beijing reportedly has the ability to work through state-owned information technology companies to access, store, and disrupt communications. Chinese companies such as ZTE, Huawei, and China Mobile have been popping up around the Pacific, and Australia is increasingly confronted with tough choices and caught in a game of whack-a-mole. This technological superiority might pose a greater threat for the U.S. and its allies in the longer run. The South Pacific is turning out to be one of the greatest points of contention between the two superpowers, but who knows? The situation might get even worse in the future. Let's not forget, during the Cold War, there was an East Bloc and a West Bloc, and nations were defined by whether they were closer to Washington or Moscow. Now, almost 3 decades after the fall of the Berlin Wall, rising tensions between the U.S. and China are recreating a geopolitical dividing line. And nations are increasingly expected to make a clear choice whether they stand with Washington or Beijing. The tug-of-war is now taking the shape of a greater dispute. China has been seeking to expand its influence in the South Pacific by providing aid and infrastructure to various island nations in the region. This has raised concern among other countries, such as Australia and New Zealand, who fear that China's growing presence could undermine their own influence in the region. At the same time, the United States has also been seeking to maintain its strategic presence in the South Pacific, which has traditionally been a stronghold for U.S. influence in the Asia-Pacific region. This has led to a great power competition dynamic in the region, with China and the U.S. vying for influence and leverage. Additionally, there are a number of other issues that have contributed to growing tensions in the South Pacific. These include territorial disputes, resource extraction, and environmental concerns such as climate change. But who knows, the situation might get even worse in the future. With the Chinese ventures growing, the world order might go through a big paradigm shift in the future and may redefine the course of history forever. What do you guys think about this growing rivalry? Will the two superpowers solve their disputes over the table, or will the tensions further escalate? Let us know in the comments section below. Make sure you press the like and subscribe buttons, and we'll see you guys in the next video.